This happened to me about a week ago. I'm 20 years old and live with my parents during the summer. However, they went out of town for the wedding of some friends, and I wasn't invited. To be honest, that didn't bother me since I didn't even know the couple, and it was nice to have the whole house to myself. We live in a two-story house, and my bedroom is in the front. On Friday night, I stayed up late watching a movie in the living room because the TV there is bigger than the one in my room, and the couch is super comfortable. I decided to sleep in the living room. On Saturday morning, I woke up and the house was still pretty dark. The living room has a sliding glass door that leads to the backyard deck, covered by blinds. The only light coming in was through a small opening of about 2 inches. When I looked outside, I saw it was raining. The clock read almost 9:30 a.m. Still a bit sleepy, I turned on the TV, but then I heard 2 soft knocks at the front door. My heart raced. It wasn't that unusual for someone to knock, but our neighborhood is small and very quiet, and we live at the end of a cul-de-sac. We rarely get unexpected visitors. I tried to calm myself down and remembered that I was expecting an Amazon delivery. I opened the app on my phone to check the order status, but I saw it wasn't supposed to arrive until 5 p.m. Immediately, I got nervous again. I waited a few more seconds, but the knocks didn't come again. Slowly, I walked over to the window to peek outside. There was no one at the door. That reassured me a little, but then I heard footsteps on the backyard deck. With the blinds closed, I couldn't see who was there. Then, a figure appeared in the small opening of the sliding glass door. My blood ran cold. It was a bald man wearing a black jacket and black pants. He had no expression on his face and was looking directly at me. He tried to open the door, but luckily it was locked. Still, I knew that if he wanted to, he could break the glass. I ran to the hallway bathroom and locked the door. I had no idea who he was or what he wanted. Soon after, I heard a loud sound against the glass door. He was trying to break it. That's when I realized my phone was still in the living room. Another bang echoed. Knowing it was risky, I opened the bathroom door and ran back to grab my phone. As I ran, I saw the man kicking the glass. I rushed back to the bathroom, locking the door again, and dialed 911. The operator told me to stay calm and explain the situation. As I spoke, I heard the glass finally shatter. The man had entered the house. His footsteps echoed as he approached the bathroom. He tried to open the door, but couldn't. Trembling, I stepped into the shower and hid. The man started kicking the door. Unfortunately, my phone died at that moment. He walked away for a bit and then came back with more force, as if he was using a baseball bat or something similar. I covered myself with towels and squeezed into the small bathroom cabinet, praying that the police would arrive in time. The sound of one last kick was interrupted by loud knocks at the front door. I heard someone shouting, "Police!" followed by quick footsteps and a commotion of voices. A few minutes later, an officer announced that the intruder had been detained. When I finally stepped out of the bathroom, I realized how close I had been to danger. I'm still shaken, but incredibly grateful for how quickly the police responded that day. This could have ended very differently. A few years ago, I was a girl in my first year of high school. I wanted to earn some extra money besides my babysitting job, so I looked for work and found an ad for house cleaning. It seemed perfect for me since it was something I could do and it didn't require me to be 16 years old. I was only 14 at the time. A man named Mario contacted me, asked a few questions, and after hearing my answers, he said I could have the job. I was very excited because I wanted the extra money, and a few days later, I started. Mario gave me an address, and my mom dropped me off there. It was a pretty normal-looking house located in an ordinary neighborhood. However, when I reached the front door, there was a note telling me to go around to the back. I went there and found a man whom I assumed was Mario. He introduced himself and said that this wasn't the house I would be cleaning. We walked about 3 blocks to another house. I found it strange, but I didn't think much of it. He invited me inside and started explaining what I needed to clean. Once he finished, he said he would be in his office and went downstairs. I kept cleaning for a while, but felt the need to open a window to get some fresh air. When I tried, I realized it was locked. I tested another one, and it was also locked. I continued cleaning, but still wanted some fresh air, so I decided to step outside for a minute. When I tried to open the front door, it was locked too. Mario's office was in the basement, so I knocked on the door, but there was no response. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I started feeling uncomfortable and thinking about all the possible reasons he would be locking the doors and windows. I tried not to panic, but bad thoughts kept creeping into my mind. I didn't even care about the job anymore, I just wanted to get out. I walked around the house trying to find a way out. The back door was locked as well. I kept searching until I noticed a camera pointing at me when I looked closely at one of the large windows. That's when I heard the basement door open, and Mario called my name, asking what I was doing. I couldn't find a place to hide quickly, so I tried to play it cool. I walked back to Mario and told him I was just cleaning. He responded in a nervous voice that didn't sound convincing. He started walking toward me and then said I needed to go with him. As soon as he said that, I ran as fast as I could, past him and toward the basement. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I rushed downstairs and saw 2 computer monitors on a desk showing camera feeds from every room in the house, including the bathroom. Then, I heard a key turning and the basement door being locked. I ran into a downstairs bathroom and locked the door, calling the police. I heard Mario coming down the stairs, and it wasn't long before he reached the bathroom door and started banging on it. Luckily, he didn't seem to have the key to that room. I knew he could break the door down at any moment, so I realized I needed to get out of there. There was a small window high up in the bathroom, so I climbed onto the toilet and tried to open it. Thankfully, it wasn't locked. I quickly slipped out through the window while Mario kept banging on the door. I ran as fast as I could to a neighbor's house and desperately knocked. An elderly lady answered and let me in when she saw the panic on my face. We waited together until the police arrived. Unfortunately, by the time the officers got there, Mario had already fled. But I showed them the messages I had exchanged with him, and they were able to track him down and arrest him about a week later. I feel incredibly lucky to have escaped that situation. A few years ago, I worked at a gas station in a very small town, about 2 hours north of where I lived. I was there temporarily while working on the house I owned. During the day, I took care of the house, and at night, I worked at the gas station to help cover expenses. The station was near a major highway, which brought in a lot of traffic since many people passed through. One night, I was working the 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift. I didn't mind this shift because it was usually quiet, and I always found something to do. Most of the time, I was the only person working during these hours. That night, business was steady for the first few hours, but around 1 a.m., things started to slow down. I was mopping the floor when, suddenly, I noticed a car pulling into the station. It was just a regular black car, but as I got closer, I realized it didn't have any license plates. The car slowly passed in front of the station and then moved to the side of the building, where I could no longer see it. About 5 minutes later, a man entered the store, and I assumed he was the driver of the car. He was very tall, around 6'3", thin, and wearing a black sweater and gray pants. His face was extremely serious. He walked through the front door and looked directly at me. The counter was about 40 feet away, so he was probably watching me from a distance. He didn't say anything, he just stared at me. Eventually, I couldn't stand the silence and said, "Hello," waving at him. He responded by turning away and walking to the other side of the store, where he just stared at the wall or at some item for sale, without looking at me again. I was very confused and started feeling uncomfortable with the situation. The man then walked into the bathroom, which was located at the back of the store. 10 minutes passed, and he still hadn't come out. When another customer finally came in to get gas, I felt relieved to have a normal person there. I almost wanted to tell the customer about the man, but I thought that wouldn't be professional, so I let it go. The customer paid and left, but the man still hadn't come out of the bathroom. I felt increasingly uneasy, knowing he was still in there. An hour passed and no other customers came in. I decided to check the bathroom since he had been in there for so long. The bathroom had 2 stalls, and since I was going there to wash my hands, it didn't seem weird. When I got to the door and pushed it open, I realized the lights were off and the entire room was completely dark. I flipped the light switch, but the light was already on. That scared me, so I decided to use my phone's flashlight to get a better look. I checked the first stall. It was empty. But when I looked at the second one, I saw the man's legs inside. Then, as I shined my flashlight higher, I saw his head peeking over the top of the stall, staring directly at me with the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I dropped my phone as soon as I saw it. I grabbed it as fast as I could and ran out of the bathroom, terrified. The man didn't follow me. I went back to the counter, completely shaken, not knowing what to do. I spent a few minutes thinking about the situation. I really didn't want to go back in there, but I also didn't want the man to scare other customers who needed to use the bathroom. I felt it was my responsibility to keep the place safe. With great hesitation, I decided to go back and ask the man to leave. I walked back to the bathroom, opened the door, and shouted for him to get out, but there was no response. I decided to put an out of order sign on the door due to the situation and the broken light. Several hours passed, and surprisingly, the man never came out. Finally, at 4 a.m., my coworker, Danilo, arrived to take over my shift, and we worked together for the last hour. I felt much safer and told him what had happened. We decided to go to the bathroom together to see what was going on. We walked in with our flashlights on, but when we got there, both stalls were empty. There was no sign of the man. I have no idea how he managed to leave without me seeing him. Thinking about it still scares me. When I was 18, two friends and I moved into an apartment together. We all worked while attending online college, and with our combined incomes, the rent was easy to cover. However, the following year, one of them moved out, leaving just the two of us to handle the expenses. The rent was still manageable, but much tighter than before, which worried me at times. After a few months, the other friend left as well. It wasn't their fault, but it was still tough, and I was forced to look for another place to live with my modest salary. There weren't many options within my budget, but I was willing to accept anything as long as it provided a roof over my head. Eventually, I came across an ad for an apartment on the other side of town. From the photos, it looked like a small building with only 8 rooms, and the interior definitely wasn't the best. Still, the price was good for me, so I requested a visit and went there that night. I met the landlord, Jackson, and he showed me the room. It was really small and not very pleasant, but again, I didn't have many choices. The following week, I moved in, and after a while, the place didn't seem so bad. Sure, it wasn't very clean and looked quite old, but it had the basics I needed. The only strange thing was a door in the hallway right in front of my apartment. It looked like another unit, but during my visit, Jackson explained that my unit was connected to the neighbors, so we shared that door. He said it was always locked on both sides and that I could ignore it as if it were just a wall. I won't lie, I sometimes found it unsettling to think that someone could hear everything happening in my apartment. At the same time, I always felt like I needed to be quieter so I wouldn't disturb them. The door seemed thin, so sound probably traveled through easily. However, during my first week, I never heard anything from the other side, not even a small noise. That is, until one night after coming home late from work, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a loud sound coming from the hallway. I went to check, thinking something might have fallen in my apartment, but then I noticed a light moving under the door of the other unit. It looked like a phone flashlight or something similar. I stood still for a while, trying not to be intrusive. I just wanted to know what was going on. After all, it was the first time I had heard anything from the other side. After a minute, the light turned off, and no sound came from there. I went back to the couch and stayed up for another hour before heading to bed. That night, I woke up a few times to the sound of knocking or soft footsteps coming from the hallway door. I never got up to check because I knew there wasn't much I could do, but it gave me a strange feeling. This continued for a few days. I would hear noises late at night when most people would be asleep. I never heard anyone talking, just knocking and footsteps. But then, one night, I woke up to a much louder knock than anything I had heard before. I immediately sat up in bed, eyes wide open, staring at my bedroom door across the room. Something about that sound made my skin crawl, making me feel like I needed to check. I slowly got up and carefully walked to the door, pressing my ear against it to listen to the hallway. Nothing. It was completely silent now. I carefully opened the door, looked into the hallway, and felt my body freeze. The other door was open. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but then I stepped closer and peeked inside. I could hardly believe what I saw. It was a room, slightly smaller than mine, but completely empty, except for a mattress on the floor. There were no other doors leading anywhere else. It was just a single room with no entrance or exit besides the door to my apartment. I ran to grab my phone, calling 911 while searching my apartment to make sure no one was inside. Thankfully, whoever had been there was already gone. The police came and investigated, but strangely, Jackson never answered his phone. Soon, we discovered that he was probably not who he claimed to be. We never heard from him again. As for the room, it remains a mystery. It could have been Jackson or whoever he really was, living there and trying not to be noticed, or maybe someone had escaped, and those were the sounds I had been hearing. To this day, I've never received any updates about the true story behind it, and it still gives me chills to remember that bizarre event. It was the beginning of winter when I had to make a big move for work. There was no way to avoid it unless I quit my job, and I really didn't want to do that. Unfortunately, I was transferred to a distant state, a place I had never been before. It was a small town, relatively far from the big city, which happened to have a large warehouse where I would be working. Since I couldn't visit the area in advance, I had to rent a house without seeing it in person. The options were limited given the size of the town, so I wasn't too confident in my choice, but I tried to stay hopeful. When moving day arrived, I left my hometown and drove for 2 days to my new destination. As I entered the town and drove through the streets, I felt completely out of place. I had always been a big city person, and this was the most rural area I had ever been to. There were only a few neighborhoods with new houses. Most of the town consisted of very old homes looking like they were built in the early 20th century. The neighborhood where my new house was located seemed to be a mix of these structures, which gave the place a strange atmosphere. At least my house was one of the newer ones. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway where a container was parked with all my belongings. I grabbed the house key from an envelope and unlocked the door, stepping inside for the first time. Seeing an empty house is never the best way to judge it, but the place looked much worse than in the photos. There were cracks in the walls and water stains on the ceiling, things that were probably edited out of the pictures. The rooms weren't very spacious either, but honestly, compared to the other houses, this was probably one of the best in town. Before exploring the rooms, I went back to the car to grab my air mattress and a few backpacks with my essentials. It was already late, and I didn't want to do the full move until the next morning, so I decided to set up the air mattress in the living room. Sleeping in an empty bedroom in an empty house made me uncomfortable, so I preferred staying in the living room. I turned off all the lights and lay down. I was exhausted, but even so, I struggled to get comfortable. About 30 minutes passed as I tried to fall asleep, until a knock on the front door startled me. I looked at the door and grabbed my phone to check the time. It was 1 in the morning. No one should be at my door at this hour. I got up and silently walked over, peeking through the peephole. There were 2 men standing on the porch, both staring at the door. It was dark, and I couldn't make out their features. I stood there, watching them in silence, hoping they would leave. They knocked again, showing no signs of going away. I kept wondering what they could possibly want at this time of night, but I couldn't think of a single good reason. After another 30 seconds, one of them turned and started to leave, followed by the other. When they were gone, I sat back on the mattress, trying to understand the reason for their visit. I lay there for at least 15 minutes, thinking about it, but I guess I was more exhausted than I thought, because I eventually drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, maybe half an hour later, I was still groggy, but I heard a long, low creaking sound coming from somewhere in the house. I quickly got up and turned on the light. I didn't know if it was just the house settling or something else, but I was already on edge. I walked toward the room at the far end of the house, where the sound had come from. At first, nothing seemed out of place. It was just an empty room. That is, until I noticed a small gap in the window frame. It was slightly open. My stomach twisted as I closed and locked it. I had no idea if it had been like that before or not. I didn't remember checking the windows. My mind was racing, and I started checking every window and door in the house. I spent about 2 minutes doing this, and when I reached the upstairs hallway, I saw a single dirty footprint right in the middle of the floor. Fortunately, there was no one else in the house, but that didn't make the fear any less real. The police arrived quickly after my call and confirmed that someone had most likely broken in that night through the downstairs window. The thought that one or two people had entered through the window and walked through the entire house, reaching the upstairs while I slept in the living room, is terrifying. Could it have been related to the two men I saw just half an hour earlier? I still live in the same house, but I've never had another strange encounter since that first night.